Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hey folks, how are you doing? Hopefully well, and welcome to this week's 1% Better podcast. I'll be honest, this is probably the 8th time I've done this intro, and normally I get them pretty first or second time around. Don't know what's happening this evening. I was about 5 minutes into another one and my phone rang, which is never good. Lessons learned there, obviously, to turn it off. But hopefully this one goes smoothly. I normally record the intros on a Thursday or maybe a Wednesday night just before I release the episode. But this week, because I'm travelling and have a lot on during the week, I said I'd record it on the Sunday night. This is the 4th of November, and get it all done early and have everything queued up so that I can just hit release on Friday morning and it all rolls out. But it's just proving, for whatever reason, difficult. But anyway, we're a minute in and I better just keep going because so far this one hasn't gone off the rails too much. So in the last few weeks I've released episodes of the 864 and the 1% Better show every other week at the moment. That's how I'm kind of rolling with it, and seems to be going okay, and happy to keep putting them out. I've recorded a lot of new episodes as well, one with an actor from LA last week, and one with a rugby World Cup winner. A bit of a slant to that one, that'll come out soon, and a few more lined up over the next few weeks. As I mentioned on the 864 intro, looking to hopefully record episode 100 of the 1% Better show before the end of the year, maybe come out in the new year. So open to suggestions, any ideas of potential guests that would be good for that kind of milestone number. Looking forward to doing it and just continuing to enjoy the whole journey and process. So last week was Stephen Ryan on the 864. Check it out if you want to learn a few things about marketing, branding. I would encourage you to do so. And the week before was Aidan Enright on the 1% Better show. Learned a lot from that one myself. Aidan, has a lot of really insightful nuggets to share, and he has a great following as well. So the numbers for that one is very, very encouraging. This week's episode is one that I was really excited to record, primarily because it was a topic that I'm aware of but hadn't a whole great deal of understanding about before I recorded with my guest, and the guest is Bipolar Barbie. So Bipolar Barbie is a mental health advocate. She's from Australia, and it was a fascinating story of her journey so far, I guess. She's quite young. She's only in her early 20s, but she's been suffering from bipolar for a number of years. And during the interview, I asked her questions that you might probably find interesting yourself around the disorder, the different states that one can be in, how she got diagnosed, how she maintains and manages it, and where she gets the idea to become an advocate for mental health and an advocate for living with the condition. She is massively followed on social media. She has, I think, nearly 100,000 on Instagram. She has a YouTube channel. She's releasing content daily, and not only when she's in a positive state, but also when she's in a very manic state, to show you the different ends of the spectrum that one can be on with this disorder. Every episode, I'd really try to identify areas that we can learn something from, and this one around the area of bipolar hopefully opens up your eyes a little bit around the condition, the disorder, and you might learn something from it as well. And who knows, it may come in useful at some point in the future if somebody in your family or extended family or friends suffers from it or gets diagnosed with it. It's all about learning, and hopefully this one helps you learn something again in this area. And before I hand you over to the interview, I always encourage you to look to sign up to the newsletter. It's always useful to do that. I put that out every Friday with content that you can watch, you can listen to, you could read, and hopefully some actions you can take to improve. Look, go and enjoy this episode. It's a really, really interesting one. My thanks to Bipolar Barbie for giving the time and insights that she shared. Have a great weekend, and thanks for listening. Good luck and enjoy. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the 1% Better podcast, and this one is a little bit different. It's a first on a few different levels. One, it's rare that I record at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, Irish time, so that's kind of an original for me. I'm probably still trying to wake up here, but there's good reason. My guest is on the other side of the world, I guess, the southern hemisphere, on the east coast of Australia. Her name is Bipolar Barbie, and welcome to the show.
Hi, how you going?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. So look, I know this has been something we've been kind of hoping to do for a long time. I think it was probably January or February this year when we connected first, and we're now into September. But that's absolutely great to actually connect at this point. I know logistically and the time zones and all of that make it challenging, but thanks so much for taking time out of your Sunday evening to come on to the podcast.
That's all right. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's great. So I've been following you on Instagram for that period of time, and you've built up a massive following there. I think that's probably your most active, and obviously on YouTube as well. You seem to have a huge following on both of those. So look, I guess simply, for folks that don't know about you, tell me about who Bipolar Barbie is and where this all came from.
Sure. I guess the easiest way to describe what I do is kind of under the umbrella of a mental health advocate. I guess I tell my story and my experiences with mental health issues and my life story in a bunch of different creative ways, through my writing, through my art, through my rapping, just, any way I can really express myself, and that is primarily done through social media. Instagram was kind of where it all began, and that's why I have the biggest following on Instagram. Things like Facebook and Twitter, they only really came about like quite recently. And the same thing with YouTube. I started that probably about a year after my Instagram, I think. So it's kind of been a learning process. I really knew nothing about social media when I started. But it is kind of a little funny story about how it did start. I had been suffering mental health issues for quite a long time, and a couple of years ago, I was unemployed, living in this very derelict house with a pretty cool housemate, and we were both unemployed. I had a huge manic episode where I was getting myself into a lot of trouble. I was cartwheeling through aisle 7 at the supermarket. I was getting kicked out of public places. I was being a public nuisance. I was sort of up so high in my mania. And my housemate asked me why I had so many different clothes, because my room looked like a bomb had just gone off, and there was piles of clothes everywhere. My wardrobe was just like jam-packed. And I just kind of looked at the mess, and I just thought, it's because I have so many different personalities. I mean, what I wear when I'm kind of depressed is very more like baggy, self-conscious, darker kind of clothes. What I wear when I'm manic is really like happy and sexy and out there. And, depending on my mood state, I have a different style that I express myself with. And I kind of realized in that moment that I really am just like a naked Barbie doll. And I don't really know, who I'm going to be each day. And I realized how terrifying it must be for Barbie dolls, to just wake up and a little girl picks them up and goes, okay, today, you're going to get married. They have no control over their life. They're just at the will of, a little girl or something bigger. And that is exactly how I felt. But unlike, roller skating Barbie and veterinarian Barbie, wedding Barbie, Malibu Barbie, I was, bipolar Barbie, depressed Barbie, manic Barbie, anxious Barbie, any version of the mental illness Barbie you could imagine.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's a brilliant story. And I guess, how many years ago was that when that happened?
That would be just about 2 years ago now.
Wow. So even in that period of time, so much kind of took off. I guess before we start kind of moving from that point onwards, for folks that maybe don't know much or the details of what the bipolar disorder is, it'd be good maybe to talk a little bit about that. The reason I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I'm not trying to compare the two by any means, but I did an episode with another type 1 diabetic earlier on this year, and we talked a little bit about the details of that, because sometimes when you have something like that or whatever disorder, you forget people don't really understand the details of it. And when we did share that, I got a lot of good feedback saying, wow, I didn't realise there was so much involved. So maybe talk to me a bit about bipolar if possible. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but type 1 is the insulin dependent, is it? Or is it not?
It is. Yeah, it's the one where I have to inject.
Yeah. That's actually an interesting point, because out of any sort of illness really that's out there, insulin dependent diabetes is probably the closest like physical illness comparison to bipolar disorder, sort of on like a chemical functioning level. So your body can't regulate insulin. Our brains can't regulate, like, I guess, just change in general. It's always over and under compensating, but particularly when it comes to things like serotonin and your dopamine receptors, but particularly serotonin. So, your brain's always working to make sure that you're kind of at a level amount. But when, the serotonin depletes, instead of just topping it up a little bit, our brain goes, into overdrive, and, it's like someone's pouring the sugar into the tea and then they've dropped the whole bag and they're just like, oh shit, that was far too much. So that's why you're kind of going up and down constantly, because once you get up, then again, your brain goes, well, now we need to get rid of some serotonin, and it gets rid of too much. So I guess that's kind of how it works on a very, like basic chemical level, but it's really a disorder where you switch, I guess, between, incredible depression, which I think, a lot of people might be able to understand, like the fatigue, the suicidal thoughts, not being able to get out of bed, low self-esteem, irritability, anxiety, like there are so many symptoms to depression. For me, it's like my messy room, weight gain, sugar cravings, that, there's a whole range, but basically it's just that I can't live anymore. It's just this overwhelming feeling of sadness and grief, this black cloud. It's like you're living in a black hole and there's just no light anywhere. There's not even a tunnel to see light at the end of. So there's that state. And then I guess the only reason bipolar is different to any other form of depression is that you will alternate between that state of depression and mania. Mania is probably what bipolar disorder is most well known for. You might see in movies and things like that, when someone's manic, they're going to be having, psychotic episodes. They'll be quite erratic in their behavior. They'll be talking really fast. I have excess amounts of energy. I don't need to sleep. I don't need to eat. The trouble is, at first it feels so good. You're euphoric. You're on top of the world. You can do anything. But, it affects your brain in so many ways that, physically, that people don't understand. Things like your impulse control. If you do a brain scan, that's actually switched off. That's not working. So, wow. You just become, reckless and impulsive, and that's not necessarily a choice. It's just those parts of your brain aren't functioning. So you're just, you're like full steam ahead, and there is no reasoning section of your brain that's going, hang on, maybe we should hold up a minute. So yeah, alternating between those two extremes.
And it's interesting as well, just something that triggered there. Impulse control is something I'm fascinated about, because it's part of emotional intelligence as well, where you can actually develop better impulse control, because a lot of times in work environments you could see people reacting to something that triggered them, but over time they can say, okay, I'm not going to react to that. But when you say impulse control goes out the window, is part of one of your personalities realizing when that's happening that actually I should be reining this in, or that just doesn't come into picture at that time? You only realize it after the fact. Is that how that works?
That is normally how it is, yeah. I think it's directly related to, I guess, I don't want to say IQ, because that might have a bit of a negative connotation, but I think the more of a highly functioning individual you are, the more capacity you may have to regain control of your mind in some areas. But I do suffer more than just bipolar disorder, like borderline personality disorder, your generalized anxiety, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So I can tell the difference between them in the sense that when I have borderline depression, it's more like a gray rain cloud above my head that just kind of rains down on me. And in that moment, it's kind of like, I don't want to do everything. Everything hurts. It's painful. It's dreary. But there is still a level of functioning. I can still sort of see out of my peripheral vision. Whereas when I'm bipolar depressed, I can't see anything at all.
Right.
And I guess like in that regard, in answer to your question about like the manic impulse control, when it comes to that bipolar, that is a really like, rather than being a psychological mental illness, I talk about it like a biological mental illness, because it really is like a faulty brain that is malfunctioning, which is not just a thought process, and it's not just about emotions. You can actually look up the brain scans of bipolar patients. You know, when it's manic, the MRIs are bright, they're lit up, they're bright pink, bright red, bright yellow. The brain is just functioning, and it's functioning to a level where they see the same gray matter deterioration in bipolar patients as they do Alzheimer's patients. So if bipolar is left untreated, you'll actually fry your brain faster than you would with Alzheimer's. So that's why it's really important to treat it, because if your brain cells are not being used, or they're being overused and burnt out to that point, you're actually losing more capacity to fight your illness the longer it goes untreated.
Yeah, no, again, that's interesting, because one of the things I was thinking about in relation, kind of parallel to diabetes, is when sometimes if I go really low sugar-wise, and then that's effectively my organs shutting down, and then I take sugar to bring me back up, it could boost me back up, and I could be really, really high, and that's kind of firing them back up again. So I can only imagine that's damaging them on both going down and coming back up more than the normal person would be. So it's probably a similar parallel to what you experienced there.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think that's why I said it's probably one of the only illnesses that you can sort of accurately parallel, even just with the mood stabilizers, which basically has the same function as insulin, where it's designed to regulate our mood swings, so that we don't have those extremes of up and extremely down. It's to kind of regulate those levels so we can stay somewhere in the middle.
Very interesting. So bipolar, is it something that you're born with? Is it something you had developed at a certain point in time? Because again, with type 1 diabetes, I only got it 5 years ago, but most people with type 1 get it at a very young age, for whatever environmental, genetic factors. With bipolar, what's your situation or the general situation with that coming on?
It's pretty much very similar, in the sense that it's normally genetic, but there's not enough research done. They can't be 100% sure. Normally, if you have bipolar, there's a 50% chance that one of your offspring will have it. So most people, you see that it's genetic. It is hard to tell though, because more people are getting diagnosed in this day and age. So a lot of the time, my grandmother spent a lot of time in the psych ward, but, my father never knew what it was for, and things like that. So it's it is a bit hard to tell, but I think definitely with me, it was genetic. My father's sister, from what I've heard about her, is textbook kind of, bipolar as well. Just with the reckless behavior and kind of things like that. But normally bipolar disorder, you tend to get it, I guess, in your late teens, early 20s. And they normally say that's because it's when your brain fully develops. So for someone like me, I can look back and I can probably see that the subtle mood shifts that were slightly more extreme when I was a child and a teenager. And friends and family have pointed that out, that you were always a little bit more up and down than other people. And it was almost like it was sort of not that noticeable. But then once my brain fully developed, when about my 20th birthday, that was when all of a sudden it was like full blown bipolar disorder. I just couldn't function anymore. So for me, I think that was definitely just bound to happen. For a lot of other people, they can develop it later in life. Sometimes they say that is triggered by perhaps like a traumatic experience. Something that's happened, the pain, the brain sort of reacts to the trauma, and they can be diagnosed with bipolar from them. Most of the time they do have a predisposition though, to sort of having it in the first place.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. So once you realized at the age of 20 or so that it was something you had gone full blown with, how did you start to, I suppose, identify with it, and were there early areas where you started to manage it, or how has management developed of it over the last few years?
Yeah, so it took me probably about 6 years from that point to get to a point where I could actually start to manage it somewhat effectively. It still impacts my life quite heavily, but I was at law school at the time. I'd graduated high school, top of my class. I was in my third year of law school. And it was about this time, actually. It was about September. I'd just gotten off kind of the spring break. I was heading back to uni, and it was almost like kind of overnight or very, very quickly, I just stopped sleeping. I had this like energy. I could do whatever I wanted. I was going to the gym like 2 hours a day. I started running, which, it's great. You're happy, you're healthy, you're eating healthy, you're eating less, you're exercising more. But suddenly I'm running like 4 hours a day. I'm going to the gym 2 hours a day, sometimes another 2 hours a day. I'm not sleeping at all. I'm up all night. I'm full of this energy. I'm pacing around. My eyes are hurting because I can't close my eyes. I can't sleep, but they're so dry because they've been open. It just really started interfering with every aspect of my life. And, friends started to say, are you okay? Like, what's wrong with you? You're really hyperactive. Like, are you on drugs? And I'm like, no, but, something really, really wasn't right. And I sort of started self-medicating. I think at that point, you get to a point where you just want to get drunk so that you can go to sleep.
Sure. Yeah.
You're so full of energy as well. You're the life of the party. You're manic. You're euphoric. You're going out. You're doing stuff. And after that, I sort of started to come down, and that is sort of the most volatile period where you're coming down rapidly. So you're starting to feel crapper, but you've also still got that energy and impulsivity. So you're kind of in this mixed state, which can be very volatile. At that point, I went to the doctor, and pretty much from that point onwards, I was going to a doctor and a therapist at least once a week. I kept changing doctors and therapists because I just didn't get the answers that I was after. I guess it's a really long story from there, which is why you'll have to follow my social media. Sure. But it took me about 2 years from that point to get a bipolar diagnosis.
Wow.
And it's been, I'd say, yes, 6 or 7 years. That was probably 7 years ago. So yeah, the last year has been relatively okay. It's definitely been the best year I've had since then. I haven't been in the psych ward this year, so that's always a good sign.
That's definitely a good sign. I'm just surprised though, if you said there was a history of it somewhat in your family and it took that long to get it diagnosed by a doctor. Why do you think that was the case, or what was it not obvious maybe?
I think it's just one of those things. A lot of I mean, maybe it's different in different countries, but when people say to me, all doctors want to do is put you on meds and diagnose you with mental illnesses, like I was literally begging for them to help me in some way. You know what I mean? That, they just kept saying, oh, you need to go to therapy because, the second I opened my mouth, they'd ask me about my childhood and, things would come up. And I think up until then, they just kind of went, well, no wonder you're, I'm just trying to find a word so I don't swear here. But
you can swear. It's a swearing free zone, so it's okay.
No wonder you're fucked up. Basically, you've got a lot of stuff that would certainly be haunting you. But I think a lot of times if you're going through grief or you've had trauma in your life, they can often just want to put it down to you just need some therapy, you just need to work through your issues, rather than there's a brain, something actually going on internally. But the average time frame sort of, in England, America and Australia is 10 years for bipolar to be diagnosed anyway.
Okay.
That's the average time frame. And 10 years after that to get accurate therapy and medication combination. So it's about a 20-year battle before most people can live a normal life again.
Jesus, that's, I guess the difference there with diabetes is you're pretty much diagnosed straight away because you can see it from your blood. But obviously with this, it's so much more complicated. So that's tough.
I was just going to say, even once they diagnose you with bipolar, then you start the trial and error of, okay, like which medications. And, I'm on 5 different medications. So it was about finding a combination that worked. So you can imagine if I'm on 5 now, and I've been swapping and changing, you've got to wait for them to work 3 months and then, see how they go for another 3 months and then wean off them and then try something else, so that little lab rat portion, I think, is the hardest because there's sort of no test just to go, okay, this is how we're going to treat it. It's very different for everyone.
How long has bipolar been around? I know it's, as you said, like I'm thinking back to when I was in school, and certainly, a lot of the disorders that are out there now, like ADHD and Asperger's and what, probably half the class had some form of that, but nobody was branded or labelled with that. But over the last 20 years, it seems to become more and more apparent what type of disorder somebody might have. But bipolar, like, is it evolving in how it's being treated and diagnosed quicker, or what's the evolution like with it that you've learned over the last, I suppose, in your research as well?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more I guess awareness being brought to it. I don't know really though if there's necessarily like more people being diagnosed with it. Is it just maybe that more people are talking about it now? The fact that, maybe I did know people or people that I know now that did have ADHD when I went to school, but I didn't know that like at the time, so I think it was just not as well talked about. But as far as, bipolar disorder has definitely been around for a really long time as far as like people have been dealing with it. It's sort of part of being on the spectrum that they do talk about. So Asperger's, autism, ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar, they're all linked. And they're all linked because of a low latent inhibition style of thinking, which is different to a normal brain functioning. Basically, people who are on the spectrum, they have more, their brain doesn't filter out as much stimulation. So what that means is their brains are processing more information, and depending on their IQ, on how quickly their brain can process information, that really depends on how much sort of damage that actually does to their brain or at the capacity that they can actually function. So that's one thing that we know now and we are understanding a lot more. And I think because of that, there's maybe less misdiagnosis. But if you know the symptoms of bipolar, you can look back through history. I mean, they talk about really famous artists, Andy Warhol having bipolar disorder. People theorize about, Da Vinci and Einstein. And, if you read their journals and kind of look at some of the projects they worked on, I mean, Leonardo da Vinci was digging up graveyards at night. There had to be definitely something going on there. But bipolar is actually, it even goes back to primitive times. Like, everyone has a little bit of a seasonal affective disorder, which mimics bipolar, in the sense that sunlight has such a huge effect on our mood.
Yeah.
So cavemen in winter, when there was less sunlight, they would actually go into a depressive state as like a form of mild hibernation to preserve energy. Whereas when, spring and sort of summer came around, the light would actually trigger them to be slightly more manic, like have more energy, to stay awake longer, everything that they needed to survive and then prepare again for the winter. So subtle mood shifts like that, or that kind of manic to depressive mood state, have been around, forever.
Yeah, it's definitely the SAD, or the seasonal disorder, is coming into that time in Ireland at the moment. So I'm not looking forward to that part of the winter when it gets dark at 4:00 here. So just on the episodes, I suppose, when you talked about that time when you were 20 and you were going into third year in law and you were on that high for a period, do the highs come on rapidly and stay high for days, or can it go up and down in in 12 hours, or is that something that's predictable for you? Is it different for everybody? Just fascinated to know about the ups and downs and the durations.
Look, it is different for everybody. If someone tells you they have bipolar disorder, though, and their episodes are not lasting for like weeks at a time, then it's probably likely they don't have bipolar disorder. I mean, I wouldn't argue with anyone that, says they have a mental illness. But, from what we know from research and in the diagnostics, the DSM, the manual for diagnosing mental illnesses, they've got the bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and your rapid cycling bipolar. Even the rapid cycling bipolar is defined as being, mood shifts, sort of on sort of like a weekly, like, or a two weekly to like a month basis. So for me, depression is normally, like 8 months of the year. And then mania would be, say, like 2 to 3 months. It can come on suddenly, like all of a sudden overnight. It's like, holy shit, I woke up and the lights went on and I'm awake. It can hit very suddenly like that. But sometimes you can feel it building over a few days, but it will definitely last a while if it's not treated effectively. I guess being on my mood stabilizers, I still get depressed and I still get, manic. But a good example is, instead of not sleeping at all when I'm manic, I sleep about 6 hours.
Okay.
So I'm still sleeping less, but it's way more under control. So all of the symptoms are still there. They're just very mild in comparison to how they would be off my medication.
And like, sleep is something I talk about a lot on this podcast, and how important it is. I would imagine getting regular 6+ hours for you is very important to keep maintenance and management.
Yeah, definitely. When I first started my bipolar journey, it was always explained to me as a sensitivity to serotonin, but I have since done a lot of research and learned that it is a lot more than that. It's a sensitivity to change. So everything from a sudden change in my food, in the amount of exercise, in my sleep, in the sleep times, coffee intake, like no matter what it is that I'm doing, it's always changing my brain and affecting me. So, my psychiatrist, they keep telling me routine, to get everything as regimented as possible. And that is why, I recover so quickly in the psych ward, because it's like you're in bed, you wake up, your meals are at the same time every day, like you have the schedule and, you have that stability. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Is my mind unstable because my life's unstable, or is my life unstable because of my mind? It's a careful balancing act. And the second one gets, out of sync, then the whole castle falls down.
Yeah, that was my next question, I suppose. What was the triggers? And I think you probably touched on a few there. If you're not keeping the routine, is there anything else you've learned about things that can set it off that are typical or atypical for you?
I mean, mine is very seasonal affective. So September every year I start going up, and sort of February, March I start going down. Right. So I know that. But obviously drugs and alcohol, I've been sober now for quite a while, so I don't do that anymore. But okay. Obviously things like that, nights out partying, not sleeping, even just, I think that's where like there's a difference between sort of a mental illness and mental health. Having poor mental health will make my mental illness a lot worse. Sure. Anything that would make anyone feel crappy, like sitting around at home all day, not leaving the house, not eating right, and any of that stuff, not seeing friends, not looking after yourself, like anything like that can definitely trigger an episode and make it a lot worse.
Question around that might be linked in some way. Like I like to talk about introverts versus extroverts and the different types of personality that way. Would you say you're more naturally introverted, extroverted, and does being on your own have an impact on triggers versus being in social settings? And obviously removing alcohol and booze, that probably is never good, but how does that kind of play into it? Have you thought about introvert, extrovert?
Well, I guess that's where the bipolar Barbie comes in as well. When you're manic, oh my God, you're just such an attention whore. It's like, your confidence, like you need to be the center of attention. Like, right. Mandate, you're almost like narcissistic, dancing on tables, just like, the life of the party. And then when you're depressed, you kind of go the complete opposite. You don't have the energy to be around people. I think I've always been one of those people that prefers to be on my own, but is really good about people. Like around people, I can socialize quite well, but people sort of drain me. So I always need to, go home and recharge my batteries. Yeah. But that is a careful balancing act as well, because sometimes you do need to let off that steam. So I kind of look at it like a petrol tank, so I get my little social fix of like validation, fill that up, and then, I go and do my own thing and sort of be creative. And, again, it's about finding that sort of perfect balance. But I do know that I can be sitting at home feeling completely shit. And then, someone picks me up and takes me for a walk, maybe down the beach. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, what do I have to be sad about? Life is amazing, Yeah. So you can get in a rut. I think one thing that I've been struggling with since trying to, starting to feel a bit better is, where is that line between I had a legitimate excuse where I couldn't function and now I'm getting better? It's like that dysfunction, that isolation that was a symptom of my illness is now kind of a habit. So it was a coping mechanism. It was part of it. And, now I probably don't need that, but I'm struggling with changing just the way I've been living for so many years, because that just became my life.
Yeah. No, I totally can get that. It's almost, you're taking away something that although was destructive for you and not good for you, what became part of you, and now you don't maybe need it as much anymore. There's almost a sense of separation from it that's difficult to detach from, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things, like everything that you enjoyed got taken away from you. You didn't enjoy anything anymore. You couldn't, leave your house. You couldn't see friends. And, you kind of go, well, what do I even enjoy doing?
Mm.
You kind of just like, what do I even do? It's like you emerge from your little cave and you kind of just look around like, okay, I don't even like, you don't even know what to do when you kind of first come out. And that I think is daunting. And also when you're cycling so much, how long are you going to spend out of that cave? I can come out of that cave and I have thought hundreds of times before, like, yes, this is it. I've finally kicked mental illness's butt. Bipolar, be gone. Like, I'm free, only to a week later or a month, however long later, come crashing down again.
Yeah.
And, be back in the same cycle. So you're coming out with hope, but you're sort of really fearful of starting anything, knowing that you could very much just tear it all down again.
Yeah, that's tough. Definitely. I can just trying to imagine that is again like coming out fully excited that you're there, but there's that voice in the head that I talk about a bit as well, that kind of inner dialogue going on saying, I'm going to come back at some point very soon. Don't get carried away. So it must be difficult. I do want to get on to your writing, your rapping, your social media, social profile, because I'd imagine, or maybe the question is, how has that helped you manage and maintain and be in a better place? Is it an outlet? Is the creativity kind of a way for you to keep a balance?
I think it's definitely been a hugely important part of my recovery, and I think in a lot of different ways. I think it's actually sort of become a really cool social experiment, because I know a lot of my fans have said that it's helped them a lot as well, not just understanding my story and taking inspiration from it, and teaching them the way to talk about mental health, because there's not a lot of people that know how to talk about it. But something that I do quite frequently is like my live feeds, for example. And it could be something really simple, like I'm sitting in the grass with my dog, or I'm at the beach, or I'm watching Shrek and I'm live on Instagram, and people are kind of talking to me and we're laughing and, we're having conversations, they're texting and I'm live. But people are like, this is great, and I'm like, really? You think this is interesting? And they're kind of going, well, we're just sitting at home alone as well. And now it feels like we have a friend. And I think that's really exciting in the sense that if social media is used in a certain way, you can actually connect people, especially people who have isolated themselves from the world. I think back to all those times that I was super depressed and I hadn't seen a friend in, over a year. I'd just been so withdrawn, but social media did allow me to kind of bridge that gap. So I definitely think, that makes a huge difference. Not just knowing that there are so many people out there that care. I still think it's really weird that so many people support me, like, personally. But I think it's great that we have created more of like a community, I think, than a fan base. When I see my fans commenting, amongst each other on my posts, and supporting each other, reaching out, that makes me really happy. Because then I see it's more of like a movement or a community, rather than just admiring one person's story. It's more of a movement.
Yeah, no, definitely. And anything that's connecting two people together across the globe that have similar stuff going on for them is brilliant, so certainly well done on it, and keep it going. And I don't want to go into too much detail around that, because that's the purpose of this, is to get people to go to your site and go to follow you on Instagram and check out some of the videos there as well, to get into more details. I guess, what does a typical day look like for you now, and how does that all play into what you do on a daily basis? Just maybe talk to me about where you're at right now.
Yeah, where am I at right now? I'm at like a really transitional point right now. So I'm still experimenting with how my days look. But I'm working on building a life after the war. And that involves, getting my books published. So I'm really trying to just kick myself in the butt and finish editing my books that I've written. Working on my rap homework. My rap coach has got me working pretty hard. Just I guess I'm going to the gym, I'm reconnecting with friends, trying to get outside with my dog and my horse and reconnect with the external world, as well as deal with my sort of internal world and trying to get my career. I'm really trying to find that balance. But it's an interesting point. There's a lot of time, I think, to reflect on how they connect. Like right now, just before you called me, before we started recording this, I was sorting through my room, and my new motto is like, if it doesn't serve me, it's gone. Because one thing I notice is that clutter freaks me out. Mess makes me depressed. If there's, the more stuff I can see, the messier my brain is. So I literally want everything out of sight, out of mind, and just have the bare minimum, because I find myself getting distracted by very small things just because it's there. And that, that makes me feel really crappy about myself, I think, as well. Because then I'm not being productive. I struggle to work. I haven't had, I guess, what you would call like a proper job. I've had to move back home with my parents, living in their little caravan annex. So, I'm glad that I have a place to live, but it's sort of, you have to hit rock bottom first, I guess. And trying to figure out sort of a way out of that is difficult. It's still difficult, and I put a lot of pressure on myself because I really want it. I want to be able to have my own little place or rent a house with a friend, and, be able to have a job and to be able to, buy my own groceries and pay my own bills. And, I want to be able to successfully adult for the first time in my life.
Yeah, but also, I guess, as you said, you give yourself a hard time, but it's very important to step back and look at all the good stuff that you're doing as well, and just back to the point of connecting people and how they're talking to each other through your platforms. That's certainly important to be aware of and practice gratitude. Do you practice kind of gratitude, and do you practice the positive stuff, to kind of keep you in a good place?
I do practice it. I struggle with it. I've recently started doing like the Qigong and meditation and positive affirmations. So I spend hours doing that sort of thing. I think, I always say to people, recovery is a journey. It's not a destination. It's a way of life. And even though you get to a point where you can start living again, it's sort of, every second of every day, you've got to keep on top of it, keep analyzing, okay, is this serving me? Is it working for me? Is this making me feel crappy? Is it making me feel good? Is it adding value to my life? Is it not? For me right now, I'm in that transitional period where, biologically my bipolar is under control, but, the years of trauma and my own internal demons are kind of not. So physically I can take action, but there's still that little, voice in my head that's kind of, you can't do it. You might as well just give up. You're not a good person, and those sorts of things that I still have to deal with and overcome. So it's just a new chapter in the overall journey, and new and different kind of obstacles. But heading in the right direction, I guess.
Definitely. And the questions you're asking yourself there sound like good questions to be asking yourself, and that will kind of push you in the right direction for sure. They're more positive thinking than negative ones, certainly talking about adding value and, going in the right direction. So yeah, brilliant. It sounds like, there's reason to be positive and forward looking.
I always try and look at it, in that way. I mean, sometimes people, people have different comments on when you put yourself out there in the way that I do. But I think you have to kind of acknowledge where you are and what you're going through, to understand it and, ultimately be able to conquer it. How can I fix a problem, when I don't know what the problem is? So, yeah.
No,
Sometimes you have to admit those inner demons exist, so you can be like, okay, hello, demon, why are you here? How do I vanquish you?
Yeah, well, make friends with them in some ways, or talk and acknowledge. But definitely, I agree, and I've had to do something similar in the past, and they're always not too far away. But look, I think we're up against the clock, Bipolar Barbie. Thank you so much for giving me and hopefully the listeners that insight today. Definitely lots I've learned from it. And I normally end just for folks, one last question, and then you can maybe give a shout out how people can connect in. I talk about books and how they can have an impact on people. Is there any, I know you're writing your own, so look forward to seeing when they come out, but any book or piece of writing that you have found influential for you on your ongoing journey?
A recent book I read last week that was life-changing and mind-blowing was Change Anything. I'm pretty sure that's just what it's called, Change Anything, by changelabs.org, I think. Okay. But it's a great book. I don't have it in front of me. I gave it to someone else to read. But yes, Change Anything. Look it up. It goes through the habit loop and the 6 sources of influence that influence habits, creation, maintenance, and ultimately how to break them. It's sort of a handbook on how to break any habit. It teaches you, I guess, how to learn, how to study yourself and how to study your own unique situation, and implement these universal rules to basically break anything and change anything. Really, the name does it justice.
Very good. Cool. I'll put that. I have a book page on the website where all recommendations go on and people can check them out from there. Brilliant. So maybe just to wrap it up, Bipolar Barbie, just how folks can connect in with you across the different platforms and reach out.
Yeah, so if you don't remember anything else, bipolar.barbie.com. So that's bipolar like the disorder and Barbie like the doll. Otherwise, you can hit me up on my Instagram. It's _bipolar_Barbie. And I mean, really, if you just search Bipolar Barbie in a Google search, the first results will be my Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, website, and everything like that. So that's probably a good place to start. If you forget, Google my name and you will find me.
It's very unique, and I'm just looking at your Instagram there. You have like 81,000 followers just on to that right now. So that's brilliant. And look, I'm delighted we connected. Thanks so much for taking the time out. But yeah, thanks again. Have a great evening.
That's all right. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So, how did you find it? A good show? Hopefully. Do take a second or two to let me know. And before you do dive off, just a couple of quick call-outs. The new podcast, the 864, 15 minutes long, in fact 864 seconds is the aspiration, is now out and ready for listening. Check it out on the site. Go to the podcast page. There's a link for 864 there, or go on to Apple Podcasts and subscribe. That would be awesome. The 864 is all you have to search for. And it's in all other podcast platforms that you can think of or should be. So, have a listen. Every week I release a 1 Minute Monday video clip, which is also a tip to hopefully make you 1% better. Check that out. It's on the website on the video page. Did you also know that only about 1% of listeners to podcasts, not just my own but all, leave a rating, leave a review get in touch or give feedback, and I would love if we could buck that trend and put it to 2% for this one. So please do take the time to give me a bit of feedback, give me some ideas about future guests or whatever the hell comes into mind. Just get in touch or rate or review the podcast on Apple. That helps. I'm available at all of the social platforms, pretty much all, at Rob of the Green. That's either with or without the @ sign, but you'll find it under that moniker, so hopefully I'll hear from you there. Last couple of quick ones. Support. So I do offer some pro bono coaching. Get onto the website, the support page, to get in touch. Few hours a month, happy to do that. And if you would like to support the podcast, that would be awesome. You can do so through Patreon and also through purchasing books through the book page on the website. That goes through Amazon and we get a little percentage. I'm not even sure what, but it's something. And finally, just to say thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I know there's lots of other shows out there. It means a lot that you're checking this one out. So have a great rest of day, week, month, year, whatever it may be, and hopefully you're getting 1% better as a result of these shows. Take care and good luck.